150 years ago, the theory of evolution found reception in the mind of Western man. It was not a new idea. It had been introduced in religious political documents in ancient Babylon, and later in secular contemplations of developing Greece. Erasmus Darwin came up with the idea of natural selection as a mechanism for evolution. His grandson Charles introduced the concept to the secular academic community, which was eager to embrace a non-theistic doctrine. This doctrine removed the need for a creator in the natural world and the need for accountability in the spiritual world. The text of this video series shows that evolution does not work in theory or in laboratory research. The evidence is heavily in favor of special creation. In this series of lectures, a complete creation model has been developed with extensive technical references. Prepare to have your mind dramatically expanded and your faith academically justified as our speaker, Dr. Carl Baugh, takes you on a fascinating journey from the microscopic to the galactic. Discover creation in symphony.
Hello, I'm Carl Baugh, Director of Creation Evidences Museum in Glen Rose and Director of International Expeditions looking for living dinosaurs. Welcome to the discussion today. We're going to discuss very intimate questions which have to do with your past, your present, and your future, and that of all of mankind. We're going to talk about dinosaurs: Tyrannosaurus rex, Pachycephalosaurus, Acrocanthosaurus. Are there any dinosaurs still alive today? Recently, our team arrived from an international expedition in the jungles of Papua New Guinea. We have over a dozen eyewitness accounts of creatures that for the world sound like in the description of those personal eyewitness accountants, including pastors, educators, school teachers, heads of clans, chieftains. These creatures, according to those descriptions, for the world sound like rhamphorhynchoid pterodactyls with leather-like wings, reptiles with a beak, a crest, hands on their wings, webbed feet. These creatures glow in the dark from their undersection. Often the tail glows in the dark. For you scholars in the audience, you'll recognize that a pterodactyl that has a tail would be a rhamphorhynchoid pterodactyl. Now, according to the theory of evolution, which in the past I have believed and taught, but do no longer believe nor teach, according to the theory of evolution, rhamphorhynchoid pterodactyls saw their demise 225 million years ago. Are they still around? Well, let's explore the issue. I'm glad you're here. By the way, how did you get here? Well, I don't mean your mode of transportation, the vehicle in which you arrived. I mean, how did you get here? You as a person, living, breathing, thinking, reasoning, feeling, deciding, sensing all that's about you. How did you get here? That question is central to what makes us tick and all our future. It's central to our reasoning processes. The great philosophers of the centuries have asked that question along with three others. Every grandmother in this audience, every child, every granddad, every parent, every individual that has walked down sandy trails and jungles, every individual who has faced the asphalt jungles of modern civilization, every philosopher and scientist has asked these four questions. These are the great questions of life. Number one, who am I? Who are you? Number two, how did I get here? That's the question I asked a moment ago. What brought me here? What are the life processes? Did I arrive by naturalistic circumstances with a fortunate combination of time, chance, and inanimate matter? Did the universe produce me in an evolutionary, naturalistic means? Or was I supernaturally created in the original proto-form. How did I get here? Number 3, what am I doing here? What's my purpose here? Number 4, where am I going? All of these issues are germane to the issues of life. All people ask these questions. They may not phrase them in that particular phraseology, but all individuals worldwide have always asked these questions, and we're going to explore these questions and hopefully arrive at some plausible academic answers. This program examines life origins, comparison of life origins, evolution or creation. Who am I? How did I get here? What's my purpose here? And where am I going? We've been taught in this modern generation, and I have explored educational paths down dusty trails in distant lands and down jungle trails and sandy beaches. I've lectured in some of the major universities and some of the colleges of the world. I've lectured to private audiences, and I've been concerned about these questions. Life origins, comparison of life origins. There was a time when I personally thought humanistic and atheistic thoughts. There was a time when I believed and taught evolution. What changed my own thinking? Let's explore the issues. Is it possible for evolution to have occurred? Two of the world's great scholars, astrophysicists, Sir Frederick Hoyle, Ph.D., and Chandra Wickramasinghe, Ph.D., explored the issues recently with unlimited funding, unlimited access to the libraries and laboratories of the world, and they wanted to know the answer to the question, is it possible for life to have originated somewhere in the universe or on planet Earth by naturalistic means? And that's illustrated in the Big Bang Theory, timeline of the universe, the naturalistic concept. And we have paraphrased that academically to show a moment of infinite temperature and inflation, an era of inflation. The documentation early, according to the postulate of humanists and astrophysicists who work in cosmology, of gravity, a strong force, electromagnetic force, and a weak force. And then a time when the universe became transparent, very early in the evolution of the universe, according to standard evolutionary model. And then a time when galaxies and quasars began to appear, and the current chaotic universe becoming self-realizing in the mind of man. What are the possibilities that this could occur? After spending more than a decade examining the issues and having at their disposal unlimited funding, unlimited access to the great libraries and laboratories of the world, Sir Frederick Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe came to a conclusion. They stated that life originating in this universe or on planet Earth by naturalistic circumstances has one chance in 10 to the 40,000th power. Let me say that again. One chance in 10 to the 40,000th power. And then these two great scholars said, let's illustrate how impossible that is. They said it would be easier for a whirlwind to sweep through a junkyard and assemble a Boeing 747 jet in flight out the other end than it would be for life to have originated on planet Earth or in the universe by natural evolutionary means. Let me illustrate how large that number really is. One chance in 10 to the 40,000th power. You see, physicists tell us that in the entire universe, whether the universe began as an expression of the creativity of a personal God, or whether the universe began by naturalistic means, the sum total of data is identical. Now, according to the measurements and calculations of physicists, there are in the entire universe 10 to the 80th power of electrons. If we filled the entire universe with electrons, you know there's a lot of space out there, a lot of apparent nothingness, even though there are atoms and the space itself has a field of energy. But if we filled the entire space of the universe with electrons, which would be the smallest unit of measurable particle, if we filled it all, we would have 10 to the 130th power of electrons. Now, that means it would be easier for someone to mark a single electron, to blindfold a man, have him wander throughout the entire universe, give him one chance, one guess. He would have to accurately select that particular electron. It would be much easier for that to happen than for life to have originated by natural evolutionary means. Again, those figures are one chance in 10 to the 40,000th power. Now, these were not creationists and Christians and theologians analyzing the data. This was Sir Frederick Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe, recognized internationally as great scholars. I have at my disposal the complete works of Charles Darwin. He's the hero of the evolutionary plot. I have the complete works of his bulldog, Huxley. I have some other works here representing atheistic thinking. And these are all at the disposal of our committee. By the way, at the Creation Evidences Museum, we have over 50 scholars, consultants, who travel from major universities or their own laboratories and spend time in research with us. We're doing research that one of NASA's engineers who helped design the most successful experiment in space that NASA has biologically performed stated to the press that the research we're doing at the Creation Evidences Museum in low-profile temporary facilities is more important than all the work he had ever done, even for NASA. And I think before the program is over, if you'll stay with me, you'll understand why this is so important. We're trying to solve the basic issues of life. Life origins. Is creation plausible? Is evolution plausible? Charles Darwin is the hero of the plot not because he had scientific data. Charles Darwin did some good work, not with the finches, that was compromised work, but he did some good work with earthworms and insects. However, he's the hero of the plot not because of his scientific achievement. He's the hero of the plot because he's the first man in history to have expressed verbally and publicly that his mind, in its chaotic disposition, was the chaotic universe finally self-realizing its own existence. Let me say that again. Charles Darwin had some major problems. He was phobic. He was a hypochondriac. He was a tormented man. Major, complete volumes have been written about the torment of his life. He was chaotic. He didn't like anything that smacked of design. He liked chaos because his own mind was in chaos, and he felt that his mind was the universe expressing itself in chaotic form. Now that is central to the evolutionary concept. Let me explain. We have a chart designed by our research, encompassing more than 35 years, and published scholastically by the Creation Evidences Museum, illustrating the theory of evolution. It begins with a Big Bang or a steady state thesis, either apply in this naturalistic state. It continues through the nebular hypothesis, which essentially means that debris from the Big Bang coalesced in the area of the solar system about 4.6 billion years ago, according to the evolutionary theory. Now, I've stated something quite important there. You see, according to the theory of evolution, life processes on planet Earth are the product of debris from a Big Bang. What that really means is subliminally, if we accept the naturalistic postulate of evolution, we're really the product of debris. We started as a piece of trash from an explosion. And these life processes continued in progression. Now, subliminally, that's important in the theory of evolution, that we began as debris, and then life organized itself. We'll talk about that a bit later. Finally, man arrived on the scene some 4.6 billion years after the coalescence of debris from that explosion. But that's not the end of the story. According to the theory of evolution, these masses of stars, this solar system, will continue to expand out and out and out until it dies a heat death. Or, if there's enough mass in the universe to cause the universe to collapse back upon itself, then we'll die with a fiery explosion. Either way, there's no hope. Hopelessness is written into the very warp and woof of the concept of evolution. It's extremely important that I get that across. Hopelessness, despair. British philosopher Bertrand Russell spent a lifetime analyzing the chaos and the hopelessness of evolutionary naturalism. And he finally said, we must settle for unyielding despair. He said, all the high noon of genius, all the hopes of man, all the work of individual lives will ultimately collapse in a fiery explosion, the death of the solar system. And all that's left is unyielding despair. Well, I'd like to settle for a lot more than that, and I'd like to give you some hope. Will evolution work? According to these two great scholars, Sir Frederick Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe, it won't work. Let's take it further. The current modern theorist who has the attention of the entire world is Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard. In Natural History, he wrote not long ago, I regard the failure to find a clear vector of progress in life's history as the most puzzling fact of the fossil record. Another scholar, Professor L.B. Halstead, an atheist, wrote in Nature, there are no actual fossils directly antecedent to man, nothing directly linking us with the rest of the world. We've been taught academically that mutations have produced these ever-ascending spiral forms of life until finally, here we are. But it just won't work. Again, Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard University and American Museum of Natural History wrote, a mutation doesn't produce major new raw material. It doesn't make a new species by mutating that species. That's a common idea people have, that evolution is due to random mutations. A mutation is not the cause of evolutionary change. And, end quote. Well, if it's not the cause of evolutionary change, what is the cause of evolutionary change? Punctuated equilibria is the current school of thought, and it simply says, and Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldredge are the designers of this concept, that thought simply states that you can't really observe evolution occurring. Since there's no clear vector of progress, no clear line of ascent in the fossil record, you find individual life forms separate and distinct and functional. And since there's no clear line of ascent, evolution can't really be observed. It's off on the side. It occurs quickly by evolutionary standards, but it manifests itself in the mainstream as a new variation or new life form or ultimately a new species. Well, that's a very convenient thought. You'll never find the evidence because it's hidden, but one leading evolutionary scholar admitted that his friends were absolutely sure that evolution was true if they could only find the evidence. It appears to me that the concept of evolution is really based on faith, not fact. In fact, I brought from the Humanist, January-February 1983 edition, Religion for a New Age, a statement. John J. Dunfrey wrote the following, I'm convinced that the battle for mankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as the proselytizers of a new faith. The current issue of the origin of species and the descent of man has an introduction written by a world-class scholar. And he said, evolution is really a faith. It's a mindset. It's a way of looking at things. But Dunfree continued a little further, and he said, a religion of humanity that respects the spark of what theologians call divinity in every human being. These teachers must embody the same selfless dedication as the most rabid fundamentalist preachers, for they will be ministers of another sort, utilizing a classroom instead of a pulpit to convey humanist values in whatever subject they teach. Now, I want to point out something. There are very fine, well-meaning educators who assume that the theory of evolution and the concept of creation are really compatible. They assume that you can really hold to both. But leading humanists and evolutionists admit rather readily that it isn't quite like that. In fact, their intentions are very clear. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new. These are not my statements, but the statements published globally by the Humanist Association. Conflict between the old and the new. The rotting corpse of Christianity, together with all its adjacent evils and misery, and the new faith of humanism, resplendent in its promise of a world in which a never-realizing Christian ideal of love thy neighbor will finally be achieved. That is the prospect. I think we need to recognize that the lines are clearly drawn. Now the question, will evolution work? In our research at the Creation Evidences Museum, with scholars from major universities participating, we've uncovered some very startling evidence. I want to point out some of that evidence to you today. Now, in order for you to recognize the importance of this evidence, let me take you again to the chart which we have formulated. This chart expresses the concept of evolution as the evolutionists themselves desire it be expressed, beginning with the Big Bang, the nebular hypothesis of debris from that Big Bang coalescing in our solar system area. And then about 4.6 billion years ago, life got down to earnest. About 3.5 billion years ago, early bacteria evolved. About 550 million years ago, according to the evolutionary theory, trilobites, Calomini trilobites, evolved. Then about 250 million years ago, lepidodendron, a plant that today is a club moss reaching no more than 18 inches in stature, but found in the fossil record up to 120 feet tall, lepidodendron. We excavated one at Glenrose with Nova filming over my shoulder during that excavation. About 250 million years ago, according to the evolutionary theory, lepidodendron arrived. And then, about 228 million years ago, the dinosaurs arrived. About 100 million years ago, the dinosaurs at Glenrose roamed. Then about 6 million years ago, the great cats arrived. And finally, about 3.5 million years ago, man arrived and looked back on all of the evolving process and could appreciate it. Well, let me show you what we have excavated in original, in situ, academic excavation. In the very same rock stratum, the same layer, living at the same time originally, we excavated two trilobites. One was a Calomini. Now, according to the theory of evolution, that trilobite lived a short time, 550 million years ago. In the same layer, living at the same time, we excavated a big lepidodendron that, according to evolution, lived only 250 million years ago. So we've brought these tangible life forms from 550 million up to 250 million years of age. But it's better still. We excavated a big Acrocanthosaurus dinosaur. I have the privilege of being the discoverer of and the excavation of the largest Acrocanthosaurus and the most complete Acrocanthosaurus that ever lived, or at least that has been found so far. He looked a lot like Tyrannosaurus rex, except he had a Texas flare. He had spikes down his spinal column all the way near the tip of his tail. That's how he got his name, high-spined lizard. And the one we excavated stood about 20 feet tall and 40 feet long. The curator of Dallas Museum of Natural History, came down to see some of the bones. I showed him one of the large vertebrae. He looked at me and he said, "Dr. Baugh, it is true then, Acrocanthosaurus was as large as any Tyrannosaurus rex that ever lived." So, we excavated one. But now, he was found at Glen Rose, and those rocks are assigned 100 million years in age. Watch closely what we've done. We've brought into one time frame life forms that supposedly lived 550 million years ago, up to live with life forms that supposedly lived 250 million years ago, up to life forms that supposedly lived 100 million years ago, but it gets better. In the very same rock layer, we excavated 7 cat prints. I mean Texas-size cat prints. This is the Burdick print. We have the original of this cat print that has been sectioned. We can see the lamination, pressure lines in it very conclusively. We excavated 7 cat prints. This one is 7 inches across at the flange. This cat would have stood about 6 feet at the shoulders. Now, according to the theory of evolution, the great cats didn't arrive until 6 million years ago. But we found that they lived simultaneous with the dinosaurs. Now, that certainly disrupts the evolutionary concept of things. Here we have the great cats in the same layer with the dinosaurs, with Lepidodendron, and with the trilobites. Finally, in the very same rock layer, we excavated 57 human footprints. How important is that? 2 of the nation's leading evolutionary scholars, Drs. Milne and Schaefersman, admitted in Journal of Geological Education that if we could prove just that man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously, that would destroy the entire concept of evolution. Well, we've done a lot more than that. We've shown not only that man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously, but that the great cats, the lepidodendron plants, the trilobites all lived simultaneously. Let's examine some of this evidence. I brought to class, or to this discussion today, the original of the Burdick print. Now, this footprint is 14 inches long. It's in a slab of rock, the original slab of rock, that of course is much larger. If you examine it very closely, you will see the ridges where it was chiseled out of the river. You'll see where they started to chisel much closer to the toes when they marked their score line. Then they realized they were going to get too close to the flange and the little toe, so they marked the score line further out. Now, this is 14 inches long. Someone in this audience might suggest that's too big to have been of human origin. Well, let me show you that just yesterday in the Dallas Morning News, there was an article showing the foot size of Lorenzo Williams of the Dallas Mavericks. And his foot size is 14 inches. His shoe is a little longer than 14 inches long. That shows that man certainly has the capability of making a print that large. I personally knew Max Palmer. Max Palmer stood 8 feet 2 inches tall. He died at age 56. At the museum we have his coat and tie and the recording of his foot. Max, at 8'2", had a foot that was 15.5 inches long, longer than the Burdick print. Just yesterday, one of my colleagues and I picked up the current issue of the Guinness Book of Records, 1995. This Guinness Book of Records states that Robert Wadlow of Alton, Illinois, stood 11.1 inches tall. He died at a young age, by the way. His ultimate weight was 439 pounds. Robert Wadlow had a foot that was size 37 AA shoe. That was 18.5 inches long. Well, now 18.5 inches long would exceed the length of the entire piece of rock. Yes, it is possible for mankind to possess a foot as large as the depression here. Now, I'm not suggesting that all people have the capability, genetic capability of possessing a foot that would make a track that size. But it certainly is within the realm of possibility for mankind. Is this a genuine footprint? We sectioned it. You can see the areas where it was sectioned. A very fine university some years ago sectioned in this area alone across the flange, assuming that the depression lines would show there better. However, in our research we found that man is very unique. Programmed from the brain, he walks in a unique fashion. He first plants his heel, and then he rocks the foot forward, planting the ball and the great toe in a lateral motion, and then he rocks the foot to the side, and then he depresses the toes in forward locomotion. That is a unique mannerism. It begins here, transfers there, and forward. That's a unique motion of mankind. Therefore, we knew we had to section across the heel to see if the greater pressure would be there, because the initial pressure line certainly should be there. I brought, for our discussion today, photographs of the sectioned area, this immediate area. This is the actual footprint. There's no question that the clear lamination lines of pressure are shown. That is a genuine footprint. One leading evolutionary humanistic scholar in this area said, all right, you've shown that that's a clear human footprint. He had previously said it was a carving. He said, obviously that's a footprint, a genuine footprint. However, he said it's a dinosaur footprint on which someone has carved toes. He admitted that it was a genuine footprint because of the lamination pressure lines. Then we sectioned the forward area twice to make sure that the data was consistent. You can see we sectioned there and forward. In both lines, we found a very clear compression under the great toe. We found a dispersion of pressure, which is common when crystalline material is compressed with another indenture. We found under each of the toes indication that pressure had been applied. This is a genuine footprint. Do you understand the importance of this footprint? If we could prove that man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously, with no precursors leading up, no life forms graduating to man, man and dinosaur living either in the distant past or the recent past, it would have the same devastating effect. But not only do we have human footprints, we excavated, by the way, 7 of this exact stature, 14 inches in length. We have some other things that I think you'd like to see. I brought with me today some treasures. First, the theory of evolution is taught consistently and academically around the world. We have in safety deposit a very rare and special fossil. This fossil is Hesperopithecus Harold Cooki, commonly known as the Nebraska Man. Well, the Nebraska Man was used in the famous Scopes evolution trial in Dayton, Tennessee by Clarence Darrow, who had behind him the scholarship of America's leading paleoanthropologist Henry Fairfield Osborn of Harvard University and American Museum of Natural History. And Dr. Henry Fairfield Osborn stated, "This is the best evidence for evolution that we have on the American continents." He said, that clearly is a graduation from an ape to a man. It's an ape graduating to a man. And if you look at it very closely, it certainly looks like a human molar, but not quite like a human molar. It looks like an ape's molar, but not quite like an ape's molar. So according to this great scholar in his day in 1925, that's from an ape graduating, progressing, evolving to become a human being. Now, Because of that evidence in the trial, the day was ultimately won for evolution. Evolution was thereby introduced into the American public school system and ultimately into the school systems around the world, primarily because of the evidence of this fossil. It was 1925. The original discovery had been made in 1923. In 1926, Harold Cook, the geologist who made the original discovery, went back to western Nebraska, excavated in the same gravel pit, and found the rest of the skeleton, the rest of the teeth. In fact, this is one of the other teeth. This is not the tooth used at the trial or referred to at the trial, but this is from the very same jaw of the tooth used at the trial. Harold Cook went back to Nebraska, excavated, found the rest of the skeleton, including the jaws and the teeth, with one missing. He had the one that missed, and it fit perfectly. Now, I wonder, did it turn out to be an ape, or a man, or an ape man? None of the above. It turned out to be a pig. Peccary. The admission was not made publicly until years later, and finally, the admission was made that Hesperopithecus was found to be peccary. The average individual would have no idea what peccary would mean. Well, it simply means pig, an extinct pig. By the way, there is currently a variety of pig in one of the primitive areas of the world that produces a molar like that. That's from a pig. But the evolutionary concept continued. I brought some other things. I wanted you to get something from our discussion today. The question is, did we arrive by evolution or by creation? You've learned that leading scholars have admitted that evolution simply will not work. But they say that's the only plausible explanation we have. Well, is it? Other leading scholars have admitted that if we could show that man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously, that would destroy the concept of evolution and verify that the entire thing had to be by direct creation. I brought a priceless artifact for you to see. This was excavated near Glenrose in the very same layer with the dinosaur footprints in the Walnut Shale, which is adjacent to the Comanche, which is adjacent to the Glenrose and Biloxi formations of limestone. I've had 20 different medical scholars analyze this fossil. It's priceless. It's a fossilized human finger. Notice the fingernail, the cuticle, the taper. Notice the medial joint. We sectioned it and found inside the replaced bone, the replaced cartilaginous ligaments, and the replaced epidermis, the skin, all perfectly preserved. I've had 20 different medical scholars analyze it. All 20 have confirmed that it is a human digit. From the medial joint forward, some have expertise to state that it is the fourth finger on the left hand of a girl. How do we know it came from a girl? There are two ways we can determine that. First, because of the taper. We men normally have a more blunt profile to the end of our finger. This is a more tapered profile. But look very closely. The back section of the replaced nail is flattened. Now, men do not produce flattened nails, but ladies, because of a beneficial bacterium, once every 28 days are susceptible to a flattening of the nails. Once every 28 days, a lady is susceptible to a beneficial bacterium that flattens the back portion of the nail. That's part of her metabolic profile. This is a human finger and a lady's finger. Now, there are other things about this which are quite interesting. It's slightly swollen, just slightly, and then it is slightly flattened. That would indicate to us a number of things. If you die by drowning, the metabolism of the human body inevitably causes that body to bloat and float. And if you're caught in a flood, then you will have compression of the members of your body. Now, I've often been asked the question, is it possible for soft tissue to be preserved? It is. It is rare, but it's possible for soft tissue such as the fingernail, the bone, cartilaginous ligaments, the epidermis, the skin to be preserved. And in proof of that, we have from safety deposit a worm, just a common earthworm. This earthworm was found near the museum in our excavations in Cretaceous layering. The same layering in which this tract was excavated, the same layering in which the finger was excavated. This is an earthworm. When I put water on the earthworm, even some of the pink pigmentation is still there. The band, the ring, is still intact. I've had very fine biologists examine it. There's no question that it is an earthworm. Well, if the soft tissue of a worm can be preserved, there should be no problem in the same conditions preserving a finger. But leading evolutionary scholars have said, all right, you have footprints. Those are somewhat subjective, even though man uniquely makes a footprint that is very distinctive. You have a human finger, but show us an actual man-made artifact to show that we're talking about intelligent man. We're talking about a prototype. In our opinion, those long ages are not there at all. In our opinion, the world before the flood, in the ecospheric balance, which we will discuss shortly, that world before the flood in its ecospheric balance would have produced the optimal genetic expression of living forms. And thus, they were intelligent people. I brought from safety deposit the real artifact, a very special artifact. It is the London artifact. It's a hammer, a man-made artifact. We're currently having wood from the handle carbon dated to give us a relative dating technique. Originally, it was found by Frank and Emma Hahn, now deceased, as a concretion, completely encasing all of the artifact. They simply found in an area with adjacent material like it, they found a rock with a stick protruding from the rock. They took it home. Their son, who spent years as a professor at Ohio State University, chipped the top of it off and was amazed to find inside a man-made artifact. Now, this is 6 1/4 inches in length. It's very sophisticated. It's octagonal in design, has an eye, even originally had a wedge inside the handle to keep it in place. Now, I took this hammer to Battelle Lab in Columbus, Ohio. That's the lab that analyzed the moonstones. Same lab, same technician, same instrument analyzed this as analyzed the original moonstones. We did a scanning electron microprobe elemental analysis and found that this artifact is 96.6% iron. That's very pure iron. 0.74% sulfur, and 2.6% chlorine. That's mind-boggling. Our best laboratories today, our finest minds, cannot compound iron with chlorine. Yet, we have iron compounded with chlorine with a minimal amount of sulfur. Now, that's amazing. Whoever made this had to be a master artisan. We do not know if this was deposited in the worldwide flood, or in the Peleg experience a few hundred years after the flood. We do not know when it was deposited, but we do know this. It was found and has been confirmed to have been within the same layer in which dinosaur footprints and dinosaur remains are found. Whenever this hammer was fabricated, dinosaurs were still around, and as we learned a few moments ago, pterodactyl dinosaurs probably are still around. Here's a part of the overlay material. Inside you'll see a groove of the hammer, and this was a part of the material over the top of the artifact. Scholars came from global communities, according to the Hans, and each would want a little fragment that they had chipped off the top of this marvelous artifact, and ultimately nothing was left but the large portion with a secondary portion. I'm trying to say that man and dinosaur did live contemporaneously. Let me make another point which I think is extremely important. According to the theory of evolution, it took the granite 300 million years to crystallize. I want you to notice on this model done by world-famous artist Robert Summers, the granite as illustrated just below the surface on the planet, and this illustrates the original creation. And the granite, of course, underlies all the continents. Originally, it did underlie the sea basins as well. According to the theory of evolution, it took that granite 300 million years to crystallize. I have with me a piece of granite. Dr. Robert Gentry is a world-class scholar, and Dr. Gentry has analyzed over 200,000 samples of granite worldwide. Some of these samples have been brought up from core drills deep in the crust of the earth. Some have been located on the surface of the earth as well. Now, inside this granite, you'll see little black flakes. These are normally called mica or biotite. This granite holds part of the answer to the question, how did we get here? You see, there are only two models. Leading evolutionary scholars have admitted the two models exhaust the possibilities. Either we were created by the direct fiat design of a personal creator, or we arrived by natural processes. Dr. Robert Gentry, with a microscope, looked inside this black mica or biotite. He found tiny little rings called pleochroic halos from the energy radiation from radioactive materials. Now, the signature of these rings is very, very specific. And not only did he find the rings left by the decay of uranium, thorium, strontium, rubidium, potassium, argon, radioactive lead, Pb-207, etc., but he found the rings left by the radioactive decay of polonium, polonium-218, 210, and 214. Now, remember, the evolutionary concept is that it took 300 million years for this granite to crystallize. Yet at all depths, Dr. Gentry found in the granite these rings left by polonium. The half-life of polonium-218 is less than 3 minutes. Scholars in this audience will recognize that after 7 half-lives of any radioactive material, all measurable amounts of that material have been exhausted. So you can only multiply by 7 for the outside possibility of time duration. He found polonium-218 halos. Now, the half-life is less than 3 minutes. That means that in order to record that polonium-218 had been in the granite at all, this granite had to be crystallized, functional, and recording in less than 3 minutes. At the outside, 20 minutes. But it's better still. Dr. Gentry found at all levels in this mica, biotite, crystalline material inside the granite the rings left by polonium-214. The half-life of polonium-214 is 0.000164 seconds. 164 microseconds. All 7 half-lives would be expended faster than I can snap my finger. That means that if you look at the data objectively, there is no possibility of long eons of time in the formation of the granite. It means this granite had to be functional and crystallized as a part of the design of the Creator in the original creation. Let's explore one other area before pausing briefly. Is there a possibility that living systems could have evolved? Dr. Robert Gange, with the Smirnoff Research Facility in Princeton, New Jersey, has taken the literature from microbiological laboratories and has found that evolution is absolutely impossible. And he illustrates it like this. Inside all material is information. For instance, inside the atom, even the hydrogen atom, there's an informational exchange between the electron, the proton, the neutron. There's an informational exchange. Dr. Gange takes the literature published by major scholars and major laboratories at major universities to show that you can take all of the natural information, the information in all of the natural inorganic materials of the entire planet Earth, and it comes out to be 160 bits of information. Now, 160 bits of information is a lot of information. Actually, 270 bits of information would be the equivalent of 10 to the 80th power. So that's a lot of information. All of the information and all of the natural elements of planet Earth, put together, the inorganic elements, the entire globe, that information is 160 bits of information. Let's take the entire solar system, including the globe, our Earth, the Sun, 8 other planets, asteroids, debris, etc., and it comes out to 170 bits of information. Let's take the entire universe. It comes out to be 235 bits of information. But now let's go to living material. Living material is another ball game entirely. Living material is extremely complicated. First of all, it's three-dimensional. And then every single component is interdependent and codependent on every other component. The smallest unit of living information we know anything about is a protein molecule. One protein molecule holds 1,500 bits of information. Now, did you get that? The entire universe of non-living material holds 235 bits of information, but one single non-replicating unit of living material, one protein molecule, holds 1,500 bits of information. What's the difference between 235 bits of information and 1,500 bits of information? Light years between. Now let's go to information that can produce a reproducing cell, a bacterium. A common bacterium is E. coli. E. coli is in the intestinal tract of every person watching this video at the moment. One single E. coli bacterium, just one, holds 7 million bits of information. Now let's go to a human cell. One single human cell holds 20 billion bits of information. If the evolutionist wants his primordial soup pond with the right gases, energy system, and lightning strokes, give it to him. Give him an entire Earth as a primordial soup pond. Give him the entire universe. Fill the universe with electrons and let the universe have his 15 billion years, 30 billion years. Give it an eternity of time for each electron to writhe, cohort, and experiment with every other electron in the entire universe. It is impossible for the entire universe, given an eternity of time, since it holds only 270 bits of information, to produce a single protein molecule, let alone a reproducing bacterium or ultimately a human cell. Watch this and we'll break. A book has been written recently by a major scholar in Australia, Michael Denton, Evolution, Theory and Crisis. And Dr. Denton admitted, evolution just won't work. He's an evolutionist, but it just won't work. He said, for instance, in the cell, the DNA provides the information for the protein synthesis apparatus. Yet, it's that protein synthesis apparatus that provides the very proteins for the DNA to exist. That protein synthesis apparatus provides the protein phosphate compounds for the energy system Yet the energy system of mitochondria, etc., provides the actual energy for the protein synthesis to function. That protein synthesis provides the proteins for the cell membrane, yet the membrane holds that entire synthesis apparatus intact. In other words, everything is interdependent and codependent on everything else. Evolution just won't work.
In Lecture 1, we learned that evolution is not plausible. In Lecture 2, you will learn that design abounds in all the creation. From the very beginning of the creation, a marvelous design has been evident. All nature abounds with evidence of creation and a creator. Venture into this exciting realm with an open mind and a commitment to truth.
Welcome back to segment 2 of Creation in Symphony. In the last session, we learned that evolution just won't work, admitted by major scholars in major scientific fields of discipline. But will creation work? How did the dinosaurs fit into the creation model? If everything is recent, why don't we have dinosaurs around anymore? Is there a worldwide flood experience recorded in the scientific data? What research avenue will give us some conclusive answers to this? Well, let's now consider the creation model in detail. I'd like to present to you Creation in Symphony, the complete model. The creation model is stated like this initially: in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. The light He called day, and the darkness He called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament. And let this firmament be separated from the waters above and the waters beneath." And God made the firmament and saw that it was good. The creation model answers so many problems. It begins like this: in the beginning, God. I will not in this lecture, nor any series of lectures or private conversation, attempt to define or prove the existence of God. As Wernher von Braun, one of the greatest scientists of this century, stated, "Why do we need a candle to light the influence of the sun? God needs no proof. In the beginning, God existed. He always has existed." If I or any other speaker or communicator or scholar could give you proof of God, that would essentially mean academically that we would have created God or held the capacity to create God. We cannot create God. He created us. Therefore, I do not suggest a proof for God. I simply expose evidences that He does exist. In fact, I'd like to give you the statements of some of the leading scholars of the world in various areas of scientific discipline. British physicist H.S. Lipson said, "Evolution became, in a sense, a scientific religion. Almost all scientists have accepted it, and many are prepared to bend their observations to fit it. To my mind, the theory of evolution does not stand up at all." He continued, "I think, however, that we must go further than this and admit that the only acceptable explanation is creation. Now, if creation is the only academic explanation for what we see and feel and know and are, there had to be a creator behind that creation." Sir Frederick Hoyle stated, "Observing the universe, I have to believe it's an intellectual structure I'm looking at, not mere chance. It's designed, it's orchestrated. Frank Tipler, in an interview with Omni magazine just a few months ago, stated, "If you do a consistent physical analysis, God just falls out." Now, here's an atheist talking. Here's a scholar who has written various publications in leading journals regarding his atheism, but he has now done somewhat of an about-face, and he stated, "If you do a consistent physical analysis, God just falls out. He is there in an intrinsic, essential way, not just put in to cover our ignorance." And to that degree, I would agree with his statement. George Ellis, co-author with Stephen Hawking of The Large-Scale Structure of Space-Time, one of the world's great physicists and astrophysicists, stated, "The construction of nature points to a purposeful designer." With that in mind, who is this designer? What is he like? We can observe the universe and find various factors in existence. For instance, there's limitless space, unending time, perpetual motion, unbounded variety, infinite complexity. Look further and you will find consciousness, feeling, will. You'll observe ethical values, religious values, beauty, justice, love, and life. No one could deny these entities exist. As Dr. Henry Morris pointed out, the first cause of limitless space has to be infinite in extent. The first cause of unending time must be eternal in duration. The first cause of perpetual motion must be omnipotent in power. The first cause of unbounded variety must be omnipresent in phenomena. The first cause of infinite complexity must be omniscient in intelligence. The first cause of consciousness must be personal. The first cause of feeling must be emotional. The first cause of will must be volitional. The first cause of ethical values must be moral. The first cause of religious values must be spiritual. The first cause of beauty must be aesthetic. The first cause of justice must be just. The first cause of love must be loving. The first cause of life must be living. My friend, I submit to you that the first cause of the universe, the designer of the entire universe, is the God of the Bible. There is no other plausible candidate. The God of the Bible is the God of creation. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Let's examine in some detail that concept. We have produced a chart under our auspices, gleaning from background physical concepts of the evolutionary model on the bottom. Big Bang theory or steady state theory all involve various areas of expression. And we have seen in the last lecture that that just won't work. Now let's see if creation will work. In the beginning, God. The God of the Bible is a God consistent with the universe that He designed. For instance, in the universe you find triplets. In human expression you find a response to triplets. In the Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln used triplets, and that's one of the reasons it's permanently etched in the minds and attention of men worldwide through the centuries. Triplets in the Bible, triplets in the universe are observed. For instance, you'll find energy, motion, and phenomena. You'll find time as past, present, and future. You'll find that the biblical concept of God and the logical concept of God is not 1 + 1 + 1, but instead it's 3 in 1, 1 × 1 × 1. God the Father is the expression who lived eternally. God the Son is the eternal expression who had no beginning, will have no ending, but had a temporal expression in time. God the Holy Spirit is the expression of God in tangible, explicit form to the creation as such by influence. So you have 1 times 1 times 1, God the Father, manifesting God the Son, who sent forth and influences you through the Holy Spirit. In the beginning, God created. The biblical record states that all things were made by Jesus Christ, and all things consist by Him. Thus, we have a likeness of Christ expressed as the primary author in the creation event. And that's logical and consistent. Please understand, we're not making a likeness of any God to worship. We're giving an expression that's logical. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now, that's quite consistent with scientific research. The heaven is a plural singular in the Hebrew. It essentially means the space-time dimension. It's a field of expression involving time, involving energy, involving an actual dimension. The space-time dimension, the background universe. In the beginning, God created the heaven, that space-time dimension, and the earth. But this earth was created as a sphere of water on day number 1. Some activities were manifest of God on day number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then on day number 7, God rested. Not because He was tired, but God rested because He was finished. Each day is a literal solar day. More about that in a moment. There was a time when I believed that these were eons of time, even in the biblical Christian mosaic of creation. But academically, it's impossible for these to be eons of time. These have to be literal time dimension expressions. For instance, the earth has a magnetic field. That magnetic field is losing its energy exponentially. In 1835, Karl Gauss of Germany, for the first time in history, measured the Earth's geomagnetic field. In 1839, he began to measure it regularly, measured it the rest of his life. After his life, others took up the task, and we have 140 years of data in the U.S. Publishing Office, Washington, D.C., giving the actual calculations, historical calculations, of the strength or moment of the Earth's magnetic field, geomagnetic field. Now, Dr. Thomas Barnes, who at that time was head of the physics department, University of Texas at El Paso, took these data and put them in the computer, and he found that not only is the magnetic field of the Earth losing its intensity and extending its lines because it's limber, it's more loose, it has lost its energy. Others had certainly observed that we were losing the energy. But Dr. Barnes put these data in the computer, and he found that we're losing this energy exponentially. Now, that's extremely significant. That gave him a handle on how strong the field was in the past. Now, the strength of that field in the past, every 700 to 1400 years, doubles according to these calculations, and with an exponential decay. That means that if you double it every few hundred years, if you go back as far as 10,000 years ago, doubling it every few hundred years, the intensity of the Earth's magnetic field would have been so powerful that enzymes necessary for life processes and enzymes inside the functioning cell could not have held together due to the intensity of that energy. If you go back as far as 15 to 20,000 years ago, the energy of the Earth's geomagnetic field would have approximated that of a magnetic star, and many of the atoms in planet Earth could not have held together. I'm simply saying to you in the audience that the Earth is young, the entire system is young, and further in this lecture we'll talk about the orchestrated design of that entire creation. In the beginning, God created the heaven, that's the space-time dimension, and the earth. And the earth was without form and void. It was a sphere of water. And God said, "Let there be light." Is that consistent with scientific research? Leading physicists have admitted that in the beginning there was light, and that light possessed the radiant energy to be transformed into atoms and suns and stars, and ultimately into life processes itself. It all began as light. In the beginning, God created the heaven, space-time dimension, and the earth as a sphere of water, and then said, "Let there be light." We come to another question. If God created the space-time dimension and then planet Earth as a sphere of water, how is that consistent with bringing forth light? Recently, Scientific American, February 1995, issued an article of major import. Scholars at UCLA found a very special phenomena or phenomenon expressed in various phenomena, plural. They found that when water, pure water, has a vibratory encapsulation of a space, we would call that a bubble, that the vibratory expression, sound, causes that bubble to collapse to the point where it reaches 100,000 degrees Fahrenheit in temperature and actually burst forth as light. They call this sonoluminescence. They've actually recorded the entire spectra of this light. Here we have the time expression. Here we have the bubble radius expression in microns. We have the height of the bubble, the collapse of the bubble, and then we have its ultimate total collapse. We have the sine wave or sound wave, which is in a sine wave expression. The sound wave is simply the entrance of sound introduced through a recorder for them, and then the actual light expressed in the laboratory at UCLA and reported in Scientific American, February 1995. You'll find the long wave expressed, the visible expression, visible light. Most of the light was in the ultraviolet shortwave range with a tremendous amount of power. Once again, I want you to see an actual bubble of light generated just by sound. I'm saying that this step in the creation model is very plausible, scientifically plausible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, originally as a sphere of water on day number one, and God said, "Let there be light." He had His own energy of sound, capability of creation, and a source of water from which to create the light, if that was His design. I'm not saying that God the Creator, in the person of Jesus Christ, used the water of the earth from which to create the light, but I'm saying that scientifically that has been found plausible. And the next statement of the creation model is, "And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." We have illustrated this first on day number one. There was simply a sphere of water, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Water is a very unique compound, hydrogen and oxygen, H2O, 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. It has very unique characteristics. It's dipole. It has its own little magnetic field. It has its orientation north and south, or negative and positive. It is a molecular combination which actually in physics means that the two elements, hydrogen and oxygen, could be transmuted ultimately to provide all of the elements we find in the entire spectra of elements here and throughout the universe. Water with hydrogen can transmute the early elements. Oxygen can be transmuted to the higher elements. There's a barrier between 7 and 8 in physics. You scholars will understand what I'm talking about. But in the creation model, that's already solved by the creation of oxygen along with hydrogen on day number one. Water has a unique characteristic in that it operates in a random order. The molecules operate each independently. They don't line up. But again, back to the creation model. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Anytime the Spirit of God moves upon anyone or anything, He aligns the object upon which, or the person over whom He is moving. If it's an object of water, a sphere of water, the alignment does something very special. I already mentioned that water is dipole, that is positive and negative. It has its own little magnetic field or electromagnetic field. If you add energy sufficient to align the entire sphere of water, then the entire mass takes upon itself an electromagnetic field consistent with the strength of the total amount of fields in the water. Did you get that? Simply by aligning the water, the Spirit of God would have automatically generated a magnetic field around that sphere of water. That magnetic field is extremely important. The Earth's geomagnetic field is actually essential for life processes. What I'm suggesting to you is that in His marvelous design, the Creator of the universe had the answer before we had the problem. An outstanding Russian scholar and an American scholar, Robert O. Becker, Nobel candidate, have collectively provided some impeccable data to show that all biological systems function on the energy of the Earth's magnetic field, electromagnetic field, geomagnetic field. The cellular information, the exchange of information on the cellular level is both chemical and electromagnetic. One reason today we have a decay in episodes of life and function of life is that we are losing the strength in that magnetic field. Watch very closely. Without that field in sufficient strength, we don't have sufficient chemical and electromagnetic communication on a cellular level. A high school student, a junior high school student, suggested to NASA that they do a very important experiment. He suggested 64 fertilized hen eggs, just chicken eggs. And he suggested that he keep 32 of those in a control and send 32 of those out into space on the shuttle. He suggested that 2 eggs on Earth and 2 eggs sent out with a shuttle be fertilized just a couple of days. And incrementally, the rest of the eggs in pairs would be fertilized various numbers of days. They did that. They had the 32 on Earth in a control chamber. They had the 32 sent out into space above the influence of the surface geomagnetic field. That's extremely important. Above the influence, direct influence of gravity, but more importantly, above the surface influence of the Earth's magnetic field. When they brought them back, all eggs that were in the control chamber on planet Earth hatched. All eggs that were sent out into space hatched, except the 2 eggs that had only been fertilized, had only been laid 2 days. They'd only had 2 days of Earth's magnetic field influence in mitosis. The others had a number of days later, 4, 8, 16, etc., all the way up to incubation time. Now, that means that mitosis in division of the cell to function properly requires the Earth's magnetic field. On day number 1, as the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, that magnetic field was formed. That also provided a basis for day number 3. This day is one of my most intriguing areas of research. Back to the creation model. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, space-time dimension, and the earth as a sphere of water. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. The light He called day, and the darkness He called night. That means this sphere of water was in motion with a regular rotation. Verse number 6 of Genesis chapter 1 states, "And God said, let there be a firmament." We've expressed this firmament with this model done by the world-famous artist Robert Summers. And this firmament is expressed as a bubble of water over the surface of the earth. Remember that at the time this firmament was built, on day number 2, we did not have the continents yet, we did not have the dry land, all of that's day number 3. But let's get to day number 2. We have illustrated this in vivid detail. Now the word for that firmament is rakia in the Hebrew. It's a very special word. The word for firmament means to compress, pound together, and stretch out this arch of heaven in thin metal sheets. Metal sheets? That threw us. That threw scholars worldwide. Researcher Dan Cook called and said, "I understand you're doing research on the world before Noah's flood." I said, "That's correct." He said, "I have spent over 20 years in major laboratories preoccupied with the question about the world before Noah's flood." And he said, after years and decades of research, he said, "I know what metal was in that firmament." And I said by long-distance telephone, "Dan, now wait a minute, was there real metal in that firmament?" And he said, "That's what the Hebrew word means." And I said, "I understand that. It is rakia. It means to compress, pound together, and stretch out this arc of heaven, or arch of heaven, in thin metal sheets." But I said, that I've taken to be figurative. He said, "It won't work figuratively." He said, "Unless it's literal, you can't keep it in suspension. Won't work figuratively." I said, "All right, I'm listening." I said, "Now wait a minute, you've got a problem. Because on day number 4, the light of day 1 was coalesced into star bodies, the sun, the moon, the greater light ruling the day and the lesser light ruling the night, and the influence of the stars were all felt, and the biblical record states that God set those stars, and you could see them more brightly and more vividly and in better color than we can today. If you have a metal vault, you're not going to be able to see the sunlight or the starlight or the light of the moon reflected and coming in." He said, "Wait a minute, don't you know that most metals in their pure state are transparent?" I said, "I wasn't aware of that." He said, "Don't you remember that when our astronauts walked on the surface of the moon, the visors of their helmets actually contained a thin coating of gold, pure gold, micro-thin, and it was transparent. They could look out on the surface of the moon and actually see all the details in vivid relief." I said, "That's amazing. You can look through pure gold." He said, "That's right." He said, "That's not all. I know what metal was in this firmament." He later came to the museum and reiterated that at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, they had done some experiments with the elements of water. Now remember, at that point in time, in creation, we only had the space-time dimension, the field of energy, and the tangible water in a spherical mass as planet Earth. That was all day number 1. But on day number 2, again, you simply had the water in tangible form. So Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories took the elements of water inadvertently, they compressed them. Now remember, the word rakia means to compress and pound together. They compressed them and added energy. The water molecules of oxygen simply turned blue. But when they got to the hydrogen, they found a very special thing. The hydrogen, when compressed with energy added under supercold cryogenic circumstances, the hydrogen bonded into a crystalline lattice, took upon itself a very unique form in crystalline lattice, was first transparent, later became opaque. Other laboratories followed up, and what we've enlarged here is a very small section of an experiment. This is actually 1/1,000,000,000th of a cubic inch of space encompassed, and we've enlarged it here. You'll see the actual photograph here. The lab photo shows the dark areas as hydrogen, taking on a metallic context. The lighter areas show hydrogen in crystalline form, metallic hydrogen, but transparent. The transparent area, veins, are not superconductive, but the opaque area is actually superconductive. Now, we're not talking about a wide band in this firmament. Probably at most just a few inches thick. That's all that's necessary. And superconductivity is a very special phenomenon. When the hydrogen became opaque, you could not see through it, but it became opaque simply in veins. The entire structure did not become opaque. That still leaves the channels for the light to stream directly through, because the vast bulk of the material is crystalline hydrogen in a transparent form, metallic but transparent. But the superconductive material, metallic hydrogen, does a very special job. I have a photo here from NASA, and I'd like to show you this photo that has made the front page issue of one of NASA's briefs. Here is a superconductive material at fingertip. Here is a magnet. And remember, the Earth has a magnetic field. The Earth is one giant magnet. Here you have the magnet suspended above the superconductive material, or you can do it the other way with no difficulty. It'll hang at the bottom, or the superconductive material will suspend above the magnet. Now that's amazing. That means that this thin layer of bonded metallic hydrogen, superconductive in veins, tiny veins, transparent in the rest of the material, would actually hold the firmament in suspension above the Earth. Now that answers so many, many problems. There is a gentle glow that hydrogen bears when it is energized. I brought today a very special instrument. I brought a supply of electrical energy, and I brought a little tube, a little flask with hydrogen. And we want to turn the energy on to energize the hydrogen, and it glows a very special color. As we turn the energy on, I want you to notice the special color that hydrogen glows. It's pink. Technically, it's 6365 angstrom magenta. That's pink. Notice the oxygen also is glowing blue, but in the center area, the compressed area, the hydrogen overpowers the blue of the oxygen, and thus you get a pink color. Now, you have seen that pink color at sunrise and often at sunset. Just before sunrise, you see a glow of pink. The basic reason you see that glow of pink is that the water molecules are charged by the consistent, lower level, intense rays of the sun's energy. When they're charged, the blue is seen from the oxygen radiation, but the magenta pink of the hydrogen overpowers the blue for just those few moments because you have intense energy field lines, and you see pink. At sunset, you see some of that color, but it's contaminated by dust particles in the atmosphere. What I'm suggesting is that there was a gentle pinkish glow in that crystalline firmament. I have a pair of pink glasses. I wore them to the studio today. Any moment I get in the car, automatically, before I turn the switch on, I put my pink glasses on. An amazing thing happens. Research indicates that when you look through pink or look at pink, and it has to be the right level of pink, when you look at the right level of pink, or 6365 angstrom magenta, your brain generates norepinephrine. That's a neurotransmitter. A number of individuals at the museum have put on these glasses and have had their dyslexia altered to some degree because of the neuron transmission problem. Now, I'm not claiming a pharmaceutical or physical benefit. I'm simply saying that it's very interesting to see the benefits. Recently, I had a psychiatrist call, and she said, my associate, she said, we're publishing psychiatrist, and my associate has an attention deficit syndrome problem. And he has to be on heavy medication, and that, of course, to some degree diminishes our practice and our ability to publish. And she said he saw one of your tapes or read one of your books about the pink glasses. He ordered a pair of pink glasses. And after just a couple of days of wearing those, he threw away his medication. Now, I'm not suggesting that you throw away your medication. I'm not claiming any benefits at all. I'm simply saying that it's very interesting to note that a number of people, simply by looking through pink, have had a marvelous transformation to some degree in their impairment. Now, let's solve another problem. I put on these glasses, and the world does not look pink. In fact, the blue lines strike in front of the retina, but the red lines strike directly on the retina, and actually colors are enhanced looking through these pink glasses. The world is a more vivid, brighter place to live. So I'm saying that before the flood, the world didn't have a pinkish cast. The sky had a gentle pinkish cast. And it probably had that cast of pink dominating through the morning hours. It would change at high noon probably to a much lighter pink, and then deepen in the evening hours. And incidentally, watch closely, research found that not only did that hydrogen in its transparent form transmit all the spectra of light so that you got all of the intense colors coming right through all the visible colors, but it filtered out the shortwave radiation, and it became fiber optic. That is, it transferred the energy of this light throughout the firmament. What this means is the sunlight of day shining on the day side of the earth in the firmament actually had its light transferred diminishingly to the night side, which means when the scripture states that the greater light, the sun, rule the day, and the lesser light rule the night, that certainly involved the moon, but it involved more than the moon. It involved the transfer of energy from the day side through this fiber optic firmamental canopy to the night side as well. That means that in all probability before the flood, there was no midnight darkness. That meant that dusk, which is one of our very finest times of the 24-hour cycle, actually had the ambient glow carried all night long. That meant that the stars would be seen in more vivid detail because the red filter was built in, so the full color of the stars could be seen. But that means you had no midnight darkness. At midnight, it probably was about like the ambient dusk of day in intensity of light. It's quite natural that an infant is afraid of the dark once they're able to see. It's quite natural that men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. It's quite natural that light is beneficial. So the greater light ruled the day and the lesser light ruled the night. That lesser light, again, certainly was the moon, but it also, I believe, involved transfer of light fiber optically through that canopy. Now, I said a moment ago this would solve a lot of major problems. It certainly would. Our research has indicated that once the creation week was complete, this bubble of water above, water beneath, in just a very thin film with hydrogen structurally interlaminated within that water, crystalline hydrogen, in thin veins that were opaque, but more normal veins that were transparent, assimilating the light, also assimilated the short wave energy. This solves a major problem. Creationists have advisedly pointed out that if we were to go back with the intensity of the Earth's magnetic field decreasing exponentially every few hundred years, if we were to extrapolate back in time between 15 and 20,000 years ago, the intensity of that field would run off the chart. The Earth's magnetic field would have the intensity of a magnetic star, and that is totally implausible. Life systems could not function. They could not function even 10,000 years ago. So we're talking about a very brief period of time in Earth history, like between 6,000 and 7,000 years ago. Recently, I received a fax, handwritten. And I've learned through the years to read the signature of a letter before reading the letter. I want to know who's speaking. And at the bottom of the fax, handwritten, it said, Dr. David Otway Ray, W-R-A-Y. The next line said, Senior Academician, Academy of Sciences, USSR. The next four lines listed academies of science in the Eastern Bloc nations where he was a member. So I decided I'd better read that letter. I glanced up at the top, and he began, handwritten. Dear Dr. Baugh, I saw you speak on satellite television, and I agree with your model. I can fill missing areas in that model. Well, I decided I better read the letter. In the letter he said, I'm on sabbatical in the United States, I'm lecturing, and he named the particular university, and said, please contact me. And he gave the telephone number at the home where he was staying. It was about 3 days before my schedule permitted any lengthy conversation, so I called him after 3 days. And he said, I've been waiting up for you to call all this time. And I was sorry to have inconvenienced him. And he said, I want you to know that your model works. I said, all right. What's your background? He said, I work in quantum algebra. He said, there are only a handful of scholars who work in this discipline. And he said, I began as an atheist, you can understand, because all scholars in Russia at that time were atheists. And he said, I knew the Bible could not be true. I knew there could not be a personal God and a creator of the universe. And I had the academic background to prove that statistically. So he said, I took the statements of the book of Genesis and I put them into the algebraic form. And he said, the formula that I worked out, covering all the broad spectra, took 8 pages to work out. I took it to my colleagues and I said, check this. The colleagues checked and said, well, the formula's right, the math is right, we just don't like the results you found. Go back and work it again. He went back and it came out the same way, and he had them check it again. And he said they couldn't disagree with the math, but they disagreed with the final results. And I said, what were your results? And he said, what I found was, with impeccable mathematic scrutiny, that the universe is just a few thousand years old. I said, Dr. Ray, how many thousands of years old? He said between 6,000 and 10,000 years. That's all the leeway I could get out of the formula and out of the math. And he said, I realized that if the universe is that young, the entire universe, not just planet Earth, if the universe is that young, then it had to be designed, it had to be created. And I knew there was only one plausible creator, and that was the creator of the Bible. And I knew I had to read the Bible, and I had to get right with that creator. I said, did you do it? He said, yes. I want you to know that I found that there's only one plausible way to know that creator, and that's through the person, the expression of himself, the person of his Son, Jesus Christ. And he said, I now know Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. That is a tremendous testimony from a world-class scholar. Now, back to the point in the last moments of this lecture. This model that I'm proposing to you, Creation in Symphony, answers major problems. Creation scholars such as Dr. Russell Humphreys, Dr. Thomas Barnes, other outstanding creation scholars have certainly been right in concluding that whether the decay is a free decay or dynamic decay, it all shows that the decay has been exponential. And that decay of the Earth's magnetic field means that creation was just a short time in the past, between 6,000 and 7,000 years ago. But until this model, and exclusively held in this model, until this model, we had not addressed another major issue. If the Creator designed the creation just a few thousand years ago, with the Earth's magnetic field decaying exponentially, which to this point is all that has been addressed, that means that there was an interdiction at the time of the flood, disrupting that, a slight buildup around the time of Christ's visit to Earth, and that's quite astounding. The magnetism in the rock showed it was a little stronger 2,000 years ago. It had been weaker previously, it had dipped, it was stronger, it continued to exponentially decay. There have been some interdictions with this, there have been some convulsions, but the problem is this: if the Earth's magnetic field began with an exponential decay, showing that it was created recently, that means that the Creator wrote into the formula a decay that in a very short period of time would disrupt the optimal expression of the life forms. For both in Russia and the United States, scholars have found that living systems depend on the strength of that magnetic field. In fact, it is so low in intensity at this point that effective cellular communication is disrupted and is insufficient. However, our model, Creation and Symphony, addresses the issue like this. It addresses the issue from a standpoint that involves your personal life and well-being. That means that on day number 2, as the firmament was created, it began to assemble the short wave energy into the very firmament itself, and subsequently to share that energy with the Earth's magnetic field on which that firmament rode, suspended with superconductive levitation. That being the case, that means that it was constantly re-energized as we living systems used its energy. You see, there are no free lunches. As we use the energy, something has to pay for that energy. Thus, the orchestral creation model, Creation and Symphony, shows that the balance of all of the energy from all the stellar bodies, the stars, the sun, the moon, reflection from other planets, constellations and galaxies at a great distance, all actually intervened and contributed for the life of man. That is astounding. The life of man. In the next session, we'll talk about the anthropic principle. Was the creation, was the universe designed for the benefit of man? Evidence in physics shows that it certainly was. With this model, the canopy of the Earth assimilated the light, the shortwave radiation, filtered out that shortwave radiation so that we would not have decay from ultraviolet radiation. It kept that charge intact. But at the time of the flood, later at the time of Peleg, we had disruptions, and we have an exponential decay. More about that in later lectures. This also solves the problem of carbon-14. Anytime a bone is found, anytime an artifact is found, the press very rapidly announces there was a carbon dating done on it, very little carbon was in it, therefore that means that it's extremely old. Our position is that the Earth system and the entire universe is quite young, just thousands of years in age. Watch this. The basic ultraviolet radiation which comes in to us today is a problem for us. Cancer is generated on the surface of the skin by mutational damaging change. But it also does something else. We lost that bubble. We lost that firmament at the time of the flood. It collapsed. And the system to re-energize the Earth's magnetic field collapsed along with it. Subsequently, over a period of centuries, we lost the suspension of water molecules in the upper atmosphere to such a degree that ultraviolet radiation streams in at an alarming rate. Not only does that ultraviolet radiation harm living systems by generating cancer, by generating free radicals. We ingest those free radicals. They bond to the cellular structure, even to the DNA. Radicalized oxygen is a major problem. It bonds to almost any chemical agent it comes in contact with. We ingest all of that, and we're damaging ourselves to a major degree. We don't have that firmamental canopy any longer. But it also did something else. The loss of that canopy and the influx of ultraviolet radiation charges particles in the upper atmosphere. This charge of particles causes an actual neutron to be emitted. It's assimilated by nitrogen-14 in the upper atmosphere. In turn, nitrogen-14 expels an electron or photons, and in the process, it transmutes to carbon-14. Carbon-14 is not normal in the life chain. Carbon-12 and carbon-13 are normal in the life chain. Carbon-14 is radioactive. The principle is if you find, after 5,600 years or so, carbon-14 having lost half its mass, if you find something with very little carbon-14, that means it's been around a long time. Not so. Since we know the firmament was there in the creation model, since we know it would have filtered out the ultraviolet radiation, that means the primary generation of carbon-14 would have not been functional at all. That means that if you find something with very little carbon-14, it simply means it was deposited approximately at the time of Noah's flood. It does not mean it was extremely old at all. The creation model answers so many problems, and in the next session, we'll get closer to home.
Much more is waiting to be explored. Don't miss our next journey into the music of the spheres.